These are the scenes of devastation in the eastern suburbs of the Syrian capital Damascus, where a fresh outbreak of violence has claimed the lives of several hundred people in less than a week. Anti-Syrian government terrorists have been using eastern Ghouta to carry out strikes against the capital. This prompted reaction from Syrian government forces and their Russian allies, who responded with heavy airstrikes. The UN chief has voiced concern over the conditions of the estimated 400,000 civilians in eastern Ghouta, saying they are living in, quote, hell on earth. Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council has unanimously adopted a resolution which calls for a month-long ceasefire in Syria. The truce, which has immediately come into force, will pave the way for aid access and medical evacuations.
So that the discussion about American concern supposedly for civilian deaths is really hypocritical and a pretext. But your question, I think, raises a more important point, a bigger issue, and that is that the United States really has no legal or moral right even to be involved in the Syria conflict. Russia and Iran, of course, are involved, but they are there at the invitation of the Syrian government and at the request of the Syrian government. And it's the right of the Syrian government to do so. But the United States military intervention in Syria with troops, with warplanes, and with drone air attacks is entirely unlawful.
The U.S. has been among the supporters of anti-Damascus militants since Syria's conflict began to intensify in late 2011. Al-Qaeda-linked Jabhat Fateh al-Sham, formerly known as the Nusra Front, is believed to have been among militant groups backed by Washington and Tel Aviv. Russia's top diplomat has now described the Nusra Front as the main problem in eastern Ghouta, criticizing the U.S.-led coalition for not targeting them.
Jabhat al-Nusra, which is the main problem in eastern Ghouta, as I mentioned, is consciously or unconsciously being treated equally with the critics and accusers of the Syrian government. Jabhat al-Nusra is not being touched, and we still don't have evidence that the coalition led by the United States is viewing Jabhat al-Nusra as a real target. Of course, we draw the attention of our American colleagues to it, but we don't see any effect from our comments.
In June 2016, Sergei Lavrov revealed that the U.S. had asked Moscow to stop conducting airstrikes against the Nusra Front terrorists.
And discussing about the U.S., what Russia is saying about America's role with regard to supporting this faction or that faction, it's important to keep in mind the real goal of the United States in Syria. The goal of the U.S. government in the Syria conflict, as some American officials have on occasion acknowledged, is to support the aims and interests and agenda of Israel.
Elsewhere in his remarks, the Russian foreign minister accused the U.S. of seeking to partition Syria. Sergei Lavrov said the Astana peace process, led by Iran, Turkey, and Russia, hinders Washington's attempts at achieving its goals in the war-ravaged country. During former U.S. President Barack Obama's term, the idea of a divided Syria was put forward by American officials as a plan B for the country should peace efforts fail to produce results.
The U.S. government has no more right to criticize the Syrian government for how it deals with this conflict within its own territory than the United States government has. During the American Civil War of 1861 to 1865, the United States would have regarded as absolutely unacceptable that a foreign government, Spain or France, for example, were to intervene militarily in the internal conflict in the United States. The claim by the Trump administration now and by the Obama administration before this one that the United States is involved in the Syria conflict because it opposes terrorism or for humanitarian reasons, those are empty and hypocritical pretexts.
In February 2016, during the Munich Security Conference, then Israeli Minister of Military Affairs Moshe Yaalon also cast doubt on peace efforts in Syria, voicing support for a Syria partition. Undoubtedly, a sovereign Syria puts a major obstacle in the way of the U.S. and Israel, trying to fulfill their hegemonic goals in the Middle East.